there guys, and welcome back to Dino Reacts. So this week we have the release of American Horror Story 1984. So it's the 9th season in American Horror Story, and I just thought what a good week to give you guys my own personal ranking of each season in the series. So guys, I'm going to give you kind of brief synopsis of each season, good points and bad points, and just show you where I rank each one personally myself. So guys, without further ado, let's get to it. Let's start ranking American Horror Story. So guys, coming in right at the bottom at number 8 is American Horror Story Cult. So this season it was much different than any other season beforehand because it was based in reality. So the main kind of storyline revolved around Donald Trump becoming president and just a fallout through the US because of that. One particular fallout was Evan Peters' character of Kai sets up his own cult. So for me, I will say a positive in this season is definitely Evan Peters. He gives a phenomenal performance in this season. He actually plays multiple characters as well. He is quite deranged in the role, he is quite unhinged, and that only adds to the excitement because you don't really know what he's going to do next. For me, he was definitely a standout in this season. Like I said, he has played multiple characters before, but in this one, he plays so many different characters that after a while you can't keep track of it. Another thing I really liked about this season was the kind of cult itself, especially in the first half of the season. There are some great dark scenes when they really go for it. There's one woman in particular, she's like a councilwoman in California, and she actually gets murdered by the cult in her home. For me, when I was watching that, it did remind me of, you know, Sharon Tate with the Manson murders. It was quite dreary, it was quite dark, and for me, I just kind of wish they did that more in this season. Instead, they do stick to a lot of kind of more political stuff. I don't mind that either. It was quite fun to see, especially as that whole thing was ongoing at the time in real life. It was quite fun, but it did start to kind of wear thin after a while. However, guys, that's kind of where my positives do stop. So there's not a lot I enjoyed in this season. It was probably the first season of Horror Story where I really didn't like what I was seeing. My main negative with this season would actually be the new cast. So a lot of times with Horror Story, every year, you know, we have a mix-up of new cast members and returning old cast members, but everyone is always playing new characters. So that's always kind of a fun thing about American Horror Story. This time though, there was a lot more new characters and a lot of old characters didn't really return. Even with that though, the new characters were not likable. There's now one person in that season besides Kai and Ali whose name I actually know. So there was nobody to care for, there was nobody to root for, and a lot of the things that happened with murders and stuff had been done already. I also prefer the cult of this season that was actually in the first half of the show. So the second half of the season, it does kind of devolve into kind of like a men's club, so these kind of white neo-Nazi type guys in the cult. I wasn't a huge fan of that. Like, I got what they were doing and it was fun to see, but I just thought the actual cult members who were in the first half of the season were a lot more interesting. Hearing all that, guys, with most of the season being in daylight, you know, there was not a lot of dark scenes in this, there wasn't a lot of graphic stuff that kind of happened. For me, I'm a person who I like the darker aspects of American Horror Story, so that's just why this comes in at number 8. Coming in, guys, at number 7 is American Horror Story Hotel. So for me, guys, I like this season a lot. It's definitely not a season I particularly hate. For me, Cult is probably the only season I didn't really enjoy fully. This season I did like a lot of parts to it. So the season itself takes place in the Hotel Cortez, which was actually based off a real hotel. I think it's the Hotel Cecile in LA, which is known to be quite haunted. You know, a lot of bad stuff has happened there over the years. I thought that was quite cool that they kind of just got the idea from there. But what I also like about this season is the look and feel of it. So the set design of this season and the costumes are incredible. The set, I would say a lot of the times a hotel, it does give you that shining vibe, which you kind of want when you're watching a horror story about a hotel. But also the costume design, you know, is a lot bigger, it's a lot grander, especially with Lady Gaga joining the cast. Speaking of Lady Gaga, this was a big season for American Horror Story. So Jessica Lange had just left the show and their kind of main matriarch of the show was gone. So with Ryan Murphy, with very good casting, he got Lady Gaga to join his show, and it did give the show again incredible buzz. I will say her performance throughout the show was actually quite incredible. She got a Golden Globe for her performance, and you can tell why when you watch it. The character herself of the Countess was actually quite interesting. She did kind of diminish as the show went on, but especially for the first half of the season, almost right up to the end, she was quite interesting. I personally did think when she was kind of more focused on killing people and being a vampire, as opposed to like her long lost love, that she worked a lot better. But again, a lot of the times the characters or the actors you paired Gaga with worked for her. I thought her scenes with Mr. March, Evan Peters, were done incredibly well. For me, Mr. March is my favourite character done by Evan Peters. I absolutely love that character just because he is quite dark, he's quite funny, and it's a very strange character that you just want to know more and more about. As well as that, we have Liz Taylor this season, played by Dennis O'Hare. Now, he had done great performances before this season, but this is definitely his standout season. So he kind of starts off as not one of the main cast. You know, he is more of a side character, but as the show progresses, he does become kind of the main storyline of the entire show. It was great to see Liz Taylor's development throughout the season. I thought that was quite good to see because you don't see that a lot on television today. A lot of times I will say, you know, horror films, horror TV series tackle a lot of issues that people don't realise, and this was a perfect case for that. Now at the same time, guys, this is number 7 on my list, and the reason for that is the story itself and how the season progresses as it goes along. It does start off quite strong, but very quickly the wheels come off and you do notice a lot of issues with this season. One in particular is the 10 Commandments killer. When we first saw that, I was very excited about it. I thought it was a really great idea, but very quickly it gets quite boring. You do kind of guess who the killer is very early on, and by the time it's revealed, you know everything that should be happening. I even kind of thought, you know, the actor who plays the 10 Commandments killer wasn't quite strong. You weren't really interested in following him because you wanted to play with all these other characters who were on the season. As well as that, guys, the vampire storyline again starts off quite strong. That first episode, I was all in on that whole vampire thing they were doing, but as it went on, the vampires just kind of became more and more uninteresting. They weren't as strong, as powerful as you thought they were going to be, and Lady Gaga definitely carries that whole storyline, but the writing and the pace of it just lets her down. So again, guys, what I loved about this season was the look and the feel, as well as that a lot of characters who were secondary characters definitely shine. But the writing and just the pace that the story goes at, it is quite slow. I wasn't a big fan of it, so that is why it is my number 7. So guys, coming in at number 6 is American Horror Story Apocalypse. Now guys, when this season was announced, I was very excited for it. It was being billed kind of as a crossover between American Horror Story Coven and Murder House. So they are 2 seasons that I absolutely loved, so I was excited, but once it all kind of came around, once we got to the end of the season, there was a big letdown. But guys, I do want to start with the positives on this, and I will say the characters this season are a lot stronger. So one thing I loved about the start of this season is we got great new characters. So for me, I do think American Horror Story kind of lives or dies by the characters that are in each season. With this season, we got new characters. You know, we got Mr. Gallant, we got Venable, played by Sarah Paulson. I thought a lot of those new characters, even Evan Peters' grandmother in it, were great, new, fun characters to play around with. Unfortunately, by episode 3, a lot of them are killed off, and we do get the return of the witches. Now again, I was a big fan of Coven. I loved seeing the witches return, but I just wish they hadn't killed off the whole cast or all those brand new characters just to give us the new witches. But again, seeing the witches, it was definitely great. It was great to see Sarah Paulson kind of come back as Fiona Good, Madsen Montgomery come back, Myrtle Snow. That was absolutely brilliant. I absolutely loved every single moment that the witches were on screen. I also loved how, you know, we got introduced to warlocks this season, so it kind of expanded that Coven world of witches and warlock, and that was quite interesting. Even the way they were kind of wrestling for the power of Supreme was quite cool. There was a lot of stuff going on that was very, very cool. You know, magic you had going on, you had an Antichrist over here, you had a lot of stuff to juggle, and I think for the most part, they did it quite well for what they had, but at other parts they did let it down. My last positive, guys, would be the Murder House episode. Now it's a tricky one because essentially by the finale it all gets wiped out, But just looking at the Murder House episode alone, and the return as well of Jessica Lange, was quite incredible. We got to see all these characters we got in season 1 and just kind of give them a happy ending, which was quite great. But as I said, that does get wiped out, so let's talk about the negatives. As I said guys, the return of the witches was quite great. What annoyed me about it is a lot of the new interesting characters we were just seeing got killed off. I think by maybe episode 3, episode 4, something like that. And we delved into the witches from Coven. Now again, I didn't mind that too much. What I didn't like though is we spent so much time in the past with them. So they went right back to the past to kind of explain, you know, where the witches had been all this time, what actually happened to cause the apocalypse. Now for me, for a season called Apocalypse, I want to be in the apocalypse and see that. I don't mind a flashback, but maybe for 1 episode or 2. Unfortunately, about 7, I think maybe episodes of this season are actually based in the past. So by the time that finishes and we return to the future, the present day, it's the final episode. So there's not a lot of kind of payoff, there's not a lot of character development in the future just to see, you know, what's going to happen with each of these characters. Even new, you know, fresh characters like the new witches that we got Bubbles, played by Joan Collins, who I absolutely loved, was killed off pretty much like an episode or 2 after meeting her. So things like that did annoy me. You know, we were kind of left with 2 to 3 witches at the end of the day, and Mallory, the new Supreme. I didn't mind the character of Mallory, but she did cause a lot of issues with the timeline of American Horror Story. So as I said already, with Murder House, we got, you know, all these characters from the original season get their happy endings. But by the end of the run of the show, Mallory, she does take out Michael Langdon, and because of that, she wipes everything clean. So the Murder House episode we got didn't even really happen. A lot of the payoffs we saw didn't happen. And unfortunately, we'll probably never revisit Murder House again. Which is why for me personally, I always say do not bring time travel into a show. This is what it does. It just causes issues. A lot of things were wiped out because of it. And a lot of payoffs just weren't worth it in the end. My last negative, guys, on this season would be Michael Langdon. For someone who was kind of billed at the end of season 1 as being this big antichrist, he wasn't the best character. I liked the actor who played him. I thought he was quite great. There are definitely standout episodes for him. But overall, the character arc of Michael Langdon, he doesn't turn into this big, you know, antichrist you want him to be. He's actually quite weak. He's a little bit pathetic in certain scenes. He did kind of end up being a bit of a weak character. You know, he wasn't this big antichrist we were kind of led to believe, and that was a huge issue with this season for me. Next up, coming in at number 5, guys, is American Horror Story Freak Show. So for me, this is probably the perfect placement in this ranking right now for Freak Show. It was a bit of a weird season. A lot of fans liked it, a lot of fans hated it. It was also Jessica Lange's last season in American Horror Story. So a lot was riding on this season. It was also called Freak Show, you know, it was based around a circus. So a lot of people, I think, when it was coming out, had an idea of what they wanted it to be. Unfortunately, Ryan Murphy didn't agree with all those ideas. He kind of did his own thing, which was good in one aspect and not too good in the other. The best part of Freak Show was definitely Twisty the Clown. He was an absolute standout character, but like a few other characters in other seasons, we only got him for a few episodes and he was just killed off. That was a huge letdown for that character. He was quite scary, he was terrifying. As someone who is absolutely terrified of clowns, those first few episodes were so scary. Unfortunately, they kind of gave him, you know, a backstory, which you never really do with your main villains. And then after giving him a backstory, they just killed him off. But saying that, guys, you know, this season, it does definitely feel like it's in 1952. So the plot of the story essentially revolves around Jupiter, Florida in 1952, where kind of the last circus acts are in that area. The main kind of circus act that's there is run by Elsa Mars, played by Jessica Lange. This was, as I said, her final season. This is probably my favourite shot season overall. I really enjoyed that about it. The colours they use, the textures, the tones, as well as that the characters in this season are great characters. You can really sink your teeth into them. A lot of them have their own separate storylines. You know, you got like Kathy Bates in there, Evan Peters, Sarah Paulson, but you also have other actors who would have been, let's say, in 1952 cast in Freak Show circuses. I thought that was quite great that they cast different people just for different roles. You know, we've got lovable characters like Matt Petite, we've got Meep, the tall lady. There were a lot of different characters and a lot to juggle with, which is a good thing and a bad thing, I suppose, at the same time. But I just felt with these characters, out of all of them in other seasons, they were the most relatable, they were the most lovable. You really enjoyed watching them. There are characters, you know, like Elsa Mars that didn't work as much, but I do think because it's such a big cast in Freak Show, there are more characters that I really rooted for and liked compared to characters I didn't care for. For me though guys, the big standouts of this season are Twisty the Clown and Dandy. So Dandy kind of takes over the role of Twisty. I don't think he's as good as Twisty in it, but I still had so much fun with his character. Things I didn't like about this season, guys, were definitely killing Twisty off. I think that was a huge mistake. I don't know why they did that at all, especially as like even coming up to the show when it was being promoted, you know, the character of Twisty was gaining a lot of traction. People were quite scared of him, so I have no idea who thought of killing him off. As well as that, the performances of Callie Bates and Jessica Lange this season, they weren't great, which is unfortunate as it was Jessica Lange's last season, and she has said, you know, over the years this was her favorite season. Just Elsa Mare, she had kind of like a German accent. Wasn't a big fan of it. It didn't really sound too German. It did sound kind of wonky. The exact same with Callie Bates. She had an accent in this series and it just didn't work throughout the run. By the end of the season as well, there's not a lot of story left. There's a lot of story happening throughout the season. It's a little bit all over the place, but by the end of it, we're just kind of left with Dandy, you know, with his kind of mission to kill all the freaks. I thought it was a very poor finale. I thought the ending, like the last scene, was quite good, but overall that finale, I didn't really like it. And that's kind of how I felt about the season. There were a lot of things going on, but there was just nothing that I absolutely loved about the season. Next up, coming in number 4 is American Horror Story Roanoke. So this season, it gets a lot of hate by a lot of fans, but I absolutely loved this season. I loved it the first time I watched it, and I did love it as well the second time I watched it. Now the second time I watched it, I liked it actually a lot more. I binged the whole season, and I do think if you're watching Roanoke, that is the best way to watch it. So the first half of the season I did think was quite terrifying. I remember watching it and being like, this is scary again. This is the American Horror Story I wanted to see. Because for me, just Coven, Freak Show and Hotel all felt very similar. Whereas when Roanoke came back, it did feel like Murder House, you know, those older days of American Horror Story. The Butcher was definitely my favourite part of the season. You give Callie Bates, you know, a really scary role and she just runs with it. And she does that with The Butcher. She's absolutely terrifying. The way she kills people in this season, you know, it is quite gory, it's quite brutal. I loved every aspect of her in this season, but also, you know, characters like Sarah Paulson's character, I think her name is Audrey maybe, her kind of English character in the second half of the season I thought was quite fun. I thought she was hilarious. So there's a lot of characters in this season that I thought were great, and again, they're characters you will remember. I also liked how the first half of the season, you know, it was kind of like a show within a show kind of thing. You had actors playing other actors. That at the time for me, that was just quite fun. It was something different than other seasons. And the second half of the season, when they all kind of go to the house, you know, and they're all filming kind of Blair Witch style, it reminded me, yes, of course, of Blair Witch, but also of Scream 3 when they go to the big mansion at the end of that movie. For some reason, it just kind of reminded me of that, and I had lots of fun with it. There were also a lot of callbacks to Murder House with this season. You know, a lot of the kind of ghosts in that house, they look back at their old murders. That did remind me of the Murder House episodes, like the nurses, things like that. That was fun. You could also tell the actors were having quite a bit of fun this season. So they kind of just went batshit crazy and went out there, which for me, I enjoyed. I felt like this season, it felt like a horror movie is the best way I can describe it. Especially if you binge watch this season, it's like watching one, you know, 11, 12 hour horror movie, which I loved. My negatives though with this season, I don't have a lot of them. One is Lady Gaga's character. Now I know she was like the original Supreme, and that would have been quite good if they kind of pulled it off properly, but her character in the end was just kind of useless. You know, you didn't really see a lot of her. She didn't get explained really well of what she actually was or who she was, and I did think Lady Gaga, I know she wasn't really available for filming, but she did feel very underused. My other big negative with the season is those redneck characters, that kind of family. Now the more I've watched the season, I've grown to like them a little bit more, but overall I just thought they were unnecessary. You know, it was just like adding something else in, throwing something else at the wall and seeing would it stick. All in all, guys, though, I did really enjoy this season. This is definitely a season I don't have a lot of negatives with. A lot of people do, but for me, I can watch it over and over again. So guys, coming in at number 3 is American Horror Story Coven. So I absolutely love this season. It is number 3 just because the next 2 seasons I thought were a little bit better, but I would always rank the season very high. I've always kind of said this is kind of the peak popularity that American Horror Story ever got to, which isn't a bad thing in your 3rd season. I think the additions of Kathy Bates and Angela Bassett were huge for this season, and both actresses do pull it off, so they're incredible in their roles. When people saw them paired with Jessica Lange, you know, you couldn't really ask for anything else. But even at that, almost every character in this season is likable. You know, we got Myrtle Snow, we got Misty Day, Madison Montgomery. There are not a lot of bad characters in this season, so you're constantly interested in multiple storylines that are going on. For me though, I do just love this season because it's good, campy fun. It's about witches. You want it to be light-hearted. You don't want it to be as dark as Asylum. You don't want it to be as sexy and sultry as Murder House. You just want good, campy fun with a load of witches. And that's definitely why it works. I do think this is probably the most popular season that's out there. People absolutely love it. There's not a lot of people that don't like this season. For me, the standouts in this season were Myrtle Snow and Misty Day. They are both incredible. I absolutely love both those characters, particularly Myrtle Snow. I thought just that was such a great role. There's so many fun lines you can find throughout the season from her. With saying that though, Coven, it does still have some negatives. One negative in particular was the amount of deaths in this season. So you do see throughout the entire season a lot of different characters die, and because, you know, the whole Supreme storyline, they're being resurrected by Misty Day. Just thought as the season went on, it kind of cheapened the whole aspect of death. If someone died, it wasn't a big shocking thing because they would essentially come back. Now what's funny to note is the character of Nan and Misty Day both died, and they're the only characters really who were likeable and nice through the whole season, and neither of those characters actually came back from the dead. Another negative would be, you know, Patti LuPone and Evan Peters. They were quite wasted in this season. They didn't have a lot to do, especially Evan Peters. When you think of the last 2 seasons, he had so much to do. I thought, you know, they kind of underused him. Definitely, he could have done so much more. And the same with Patti. By hiring her, they could have given her a much meatier role. They could have made her a witch or something like that. You know, I did think the whole Christian lady storyline was quite good, but again, they could have just given her so much more to do. And my last negative, there are a few plot points in the season that just kind of go nowhere. Like the Beast Man guy at the start of the season, he was kind of billed as one of the big bads of this season, and nothing really happened with him. We saw him in a couple of scenes and then he just wasn't talked about anymore. So with that, I didn't like that aspect of it, that there were a few storylines that just kind of went nowhere. But overall as a season, it's an absolutely incredible season and one definitely to check out. Alright guys, we are down to our final 2. So there are 2 seasons left and these ones are very close to me. I love both of these seasons, but one is just a little bit better than the other. So coming in at number 2 is American Horror Story Murder House. So I remember when American Horror Story started and it was pretty much nothing like it on TV. You know, we did have like sci-fi horror shows, you know, with Supernatural, Buffy, stuff like that, but nothing really that you could compare to American Horror Story. So there was no anthology kind of talk at that point. It was just this brand new show that was going to be quite dark, quite graphic, quite brutal. You know, when you saw the trailers at the time, you really wanted to see what the hell the show was going to be about. And I can say it definitely delivers. Everything about that first season I absolutely love. I can't actually think of a negative of this season, even though it's my number 2. The season itself is probably one of the scariest seasons of American Horror Story. The opening kind of, you know, title sequence alone is terrifying, and right from that pilot episode you know it's going to be a great show. So you pair that, you know, with characters like Constance, you know, played by Jessica Lange. I love that character. She is by far my favourite Jessica Lange character. But also, you know, you had Vivian Harmon, Ben Harmon, so you had this whole storyline going on with this family after the dad or the husband, let's say, had an affair. So I thought that was quite cool that it was a classic ghost story. It was pretty much, you know, a family in a haunted house. but there was so much more going on. There were a lot of great scenes in this show. There were a lot of great performances, especially when they started pairing different actors with each other. So as I said, you know, you'd Vivian Harmon and Ben Harmon. Any scene they were kind of in, any dramatic scenes were quite great. Almost every storyline in this season works on so many levels. So you have Tate and you have Violet, that kind of whole Romeo and Juliet twisted storyline. I didn't really like that, you know, Tate was made out to be this lovable character on Tumblr. Wasn't a big fan of that, but their storyline itself is quite great to watch. But you also have Ben and Vivian Harmon going through their marriage troubles in a haunted house. As I said, Jessica Lange as the character of Constance steals the entire show, but she's also paired with Moira the maid, and any scenes they're in, you know, and they're just back and forth, two incredible actresses. The payoff is huge. And guys, just kind of like the last positive I will give on this season were the ghosts in the house. So we did have our main characters and they had all their storylines going on, but we also had these kind of side characters, these ghosts kind of trapped in the murder house, this kind of eternal hell that they're stuck in forever and they can't leave. I thought Lily Rabe was incredible in her role in this season. I thought even just the storyline with the two gay characters, and they kind of hated each other and was stuck for eternity together. That was quite good. Even Moira the maid, you know, when she went on Halloween to see her mother who was dying, all of that worked so well. And for me, that's when horror works really well, when you have a great horror story that's scary, but you can bring in real life issues at the same time. So as I said, guys, I don't have a lot of negatives for this season. If you're going to start American Horror Story, I always say start it on Murder House. Some people don't like this season. I absolutely love it. I think it's a standout of the whole show. And guys, coming in at number 1 is American Horror Story Asylum. What a season. This season is batshit crazy. It is very dark, I will say that. It's not, you know, the campy season we get in Coven, you know, it's not the murder house kind of season we get before that. It's quite dark, it's quite brutal, and it has everything in there. So going through the list of things that it has, you know, we got demons, we got Nazis, we got serial killers, we got aliens, we've killer Santas. Everything you could think of is pretty much in this season. Now, I remember when this season was coming out, and I remember reading a lot of reviews that they were saying this season was very messy, it was very all over the place, and I remember watching at the time and I did kind of think here and there that it was a little bit like that, but over watching it through the years, it still remains my favourite season of this show. So American Horror Story Asylum, it is set in the 60s in the asylum. So what I liked about this season is you do get to see really, you know, what people went through in these asylums in the 60s. These are people that pretty much were forgotten by the state, you know, they were kind of sleeping in dire situations, they were living in horrendous places around the country. The standouts this season are definitely Lana Winters and Bloodyface. That whole storyline was so incredible to watch, especially Lana Winters. For me personally, I would put her up there, you know, with the big scream queens in horror movies. I thought her character was fascinating to watch. As the story or the season went on, you know, just more layers and layers of her character got revealed, and that was the same with Bloodyface. So with Bloodyface, you know, he's pretty much starts as this serial killer that's killing people in the 60s. Now we do get kind of like a flash forward back and forth with another Bloodyface in the future, setting up the story for us. I thought Bloodyface was quite a terrifying character. He does kind of fit into the season definitely, because his character in itself is quite depressing, but just his back and forth with Lana Winters, Sarah Paulson's Lana Winters, was quite great to watch. I will say this season it is quite dark, it's very dreary, it's very depressing. I remember first watching it on like episode 6 or 7 when it came out, and I did kind of think, you know, how much more of this show can I watch without anything good and happy happening. Luckily, I think maybe episode 8 or 9, something like that, and the name game does get thrown in. It's kind of like a musical number, and it's so different than the rest of the season, but it's exactly what you need. It's kind of like a breath of fresh air. Speaking of the name game, Jessica Lange plays Sister Jude in this season, and again, pairing her with Dr. Arden was a great choice. She's very much this kind of religious Catholic nun character, and she gets paired with this kind of doctor of science, Dr. Arden, who ends up being a Nazi. Now, as I said, this season is quite bonkers. There's a lot happening. There's Nazi killers, aliens, demons. Even like Sister Mary Eunice, she becomes possessed by a demon. Lily Rabe gives an incredible performance in this series as well. So there's so many standout performances in this season. There's a lot of stuff happening, and the only thing I didn't like was probably just the alien storyline. But overall, I love this season. I love a good serial killer storyline. Bloodyface definitely delivered that, but even Dr. Arden and his kind of Nazi experiments, everything was going on this season. For me, there's not a way, if you're a horror fan, you can hate this season, and that is why it is my number one. But guys, remember, that is just my own personal ranking of American Horror Story. If yours are different, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you like, just so you don't miss another video. And until next time, Heidi ho.